Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are standing at the edge of a prehistoric forest under a moon that glows pale and indifferent above an Earth that hasn't yet heard of mammals, let alone humans. The air hums with insects the size of your hand, and somewhere in the dense underbrush, a creature the size of a minivan exhales quietly in its sleep. You're staring at an odd shape in the dirt, a shallow oval depression ringed with ancient moss and the faintest outline of armored skin. It's like something heavy laid down here, belly up, and didn't get back up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. The first thing you notice is how unnatural it feels, this idea that something covered in armor might have ever willingly exposed its underbelly. You crouch by the depression, tracing the ridged edges with your fingers. There's no skeleton left, not really, just a suggestion. The soil here has shifted enough over the eons to erase bone, but keep the memory of the body's presence. And that presence, oddly enough, seems upside down. You picture it massive, low to the ground, a back like a living fortress of scutes and spikes. Maybe an ankylosaurus, maybe something older. You can't say for sure. But what kind of animal lies down on its back, spine pressing into soil, stomach open to the stars? Definitely not the kind with predators still lurking. But then again, this island was different. This was a land without legs where the usual rules had long collapsed under volcanic ash, ancient floods, and time's relentless shrug. Here, even giants could fall strangely. You stretch your own limbs into the shape the imprint demands and immediately regret it. No matter how soft the moss your back aches, your arms flail for balance and your brain screams something entirely reasonable. This is how things die. There's something oddly personal about it, though. It's not the impact crater of some final collapse. It's too soft. More like a nest than a grave. Maybe a place this creature returned to over and over to dream beneath the shifting stars. Historians still debate whether dinosaurs even experienced something close to sleep as we understand it. REM cycles, twitching dreams, soft vocalizations in the night. Birds, their closest living relatives, certainly do. Some even sleep one hemisphere of their brain at a time like they're always half ready to fly. Crocodiles, same thing. Always alert. Always ancient. And then there's this hole. You run your hand along the edge and feel the faintest impression of what might have been tail drag. Or just erosion. It's hard to know. One paleontologist once joked that reconstructing dinosaur sleep positions is like reverse engineering yoga poses from dried sweat stains. And yet here we are still trying. Off to your right, a cluster of bones, small fractured, discolored. Not dinosaur. Likely mammal? Likely dead, too. But even that creature seems to have curled into the depression after the armored titan left it behind, seeking shelter in the shadow of something ancient. There's poetry there. Or maybe just desperation. An off-topic fact. All right. Did you know that horses can't vomit? Evolution simply sealed that valve shut. Why? No one knows for sure, but it means horses, like armored dinosaurs, have no easy way to relieve pressure. They either deal with it or don't. Maybe that's the secret to this shallow bed. A relief valve, not for digestion, but for weight, to lie back and let the armor breathe. Still, you're not convinced. You imagine trying to fall asleep in such a posture, spiked shoulders jutting into your own neck? Massive tail thumping into the mud every time you exhale too hard, predators sniffing around your vulnerable stomach. No wonder most reconstructions show these dinosaurs curled on their sides or settled into thick vegetation like tanks and camouflage. But this imprint says otherwise. Maybe it wasn't sleep at all. Maybe it was surrender, collapse. Or maybe it's a geological joke and you're misreading everything. The moon slips behind a cloud and the forest darkens. You feel smaller now. That familiar prehistoric pressure like the past is breathing down your neck and judging your every thought with a side eye from 100 million years ago. You lie down once more. This time you don't fight the discomfort. You just let the moss cradle your back and stare up at the night sky the way that ancient armored creature might have. Breathing shallow, listening to the wind, imagining a world where armor didn't mean invincibility, just a different way to feel safe. Maybe you did sleep like this, maybe not often, but just once. Under a moon like this, in a clearing like this, where no legs were needed and no enemies dared approach. And maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't have survived it either. You wake up sore. Not from sleep, but from the kind of half-conscious doze that leaves your limbs numb and your dignity questionable. The sky has started to pale, not yet dawn, but no longer night. And still that shallow depression in the earth looks at you like it's keeping secrets. You shift your weight and brush away some damp leaves, revealing something you hadn't noticed before, a slight twist in the contour near where the tail would have been. It curves inward, not splayed out like a fish fin, not straight like a dragging rudder, but tucked in. Curled, like a tail pulled beneath the body for warmth, or protection, or sleep. And now the question sharpens, did these walking fortresses, these clumsy armored beasts, use their own weapons as comfort? You picture an ankylosaurus, again, not as the bludgeoning brute the museums love, but as something more cautious, thoughtful even, lying down at dusk in some fern-covered gully, swinging its tail in an arc not to crush something, but to fold it in. The fossil record gives us a few tantalizing hints. One famously well-preserved ankylosaur from Alberta, Canada was found with its tail arched gently under the body, not flung out like a club. And while the cause of death is still unknown, historians still debate whether it drowned in a floodplain or suffocated in a landslide. The tail's posture suggests something besides violence. Maybe not sleep exactly, but stillness. You try mimicking the shape again. You crouch low to the ground, flatten your spine, and fold your arms toward your core. Then awkwardly, you bend your legs and try to tuck your tail such as it is. And for a brief moment, you almost feel stable. Low, shielded, like a sandwich wrapped in its own armor. The tail, it turns out, may have served more than one purpose. Sure, it could break bones. A single tail swipe from an adult ankylosaurus could shatter a predator's leg like a twig. But in rest, it could function as a brace locking into the ground like a kickstand, especially if the creature slept belly down. Of course, if it rolled over by accident, that same tail might have been the reason it didn't get up again. And there's a tragic kind of comedy in that. Odd fact for this stretch of the night: see, cucumbers breathe through their butts. That's not a joke, it's biology. The cloaca draws in seawater and extracts oxygen. Nature has a sense of humor, even if it's the slow, ironic kind. And speaking of irony, it's entirely possible that ankylosaurs, for all their armor, didn't die from combat wounds at all. Most fossilized specimens show little evidence of violent trauma. Instead, they appear to have succumbed to flood, starvation, heat stroke, or plain bad luck. Just like you that one time you ate expired sushi at the gas station. You wander further into the forest, following the trail of where the armored body might have once walked. The soil's been churned by centuries of roots and rockfall, but there's still a strange uniformity to the spacing of small depressions, like something heavy with short legs and a swinging tail moved this way. The club, you realize, would have left marks. Maybe not footprints, but drag lines. Some fossil sites have preserved exactly that, parallel sets of foot impressions flanking a shallow groove made by a heavy tail that never fully lifted from the earth. You imagine the sound of that tail, a low, rhythmic scrape, like a broom on sand. The kind of noise that tells you something ancient is coming, and it has absolutely nowhere else to be. Historians still don't agree on how much flexibility those tails had. Some argue the joints were stiffened with tendons and ossified ligaments, allowing for only minor swings. Others say they could whip that club fast enough to be a blur in predator vision. Either way, folding it beneath the body for sleep might have been a natural habit. If not for comfort, then for balance. You stumble across another odd dip in the earth. This one shallower, more oval-shaped. Not a nest per se, this isn't a brooding theropod story, but maybe a rest spot. Maybe a travel pause. You crouch again, and this time try lying down with your arm curled behind your head tail or backpack tucked beneath you. It's still absurd, but less absurd than you thought 20 minutes ago. Insects buzz like a white noise machine on overdrive. The forest exhales steam, and for a moment you forget how weird it is to obsess over how extinct animals slept. You just lie there imaging the slow heave of a belly against the ground, the pressure of earth against ribs, the heavy thump of a tail sliding into place like the final piece of a puzzle. And then your stomach growls. You sit up mildly annoyed that modern biology keeps interfering with your prehistoric cosplay. But hey, if an ankylosaur could tuck its tail under like a warm scarf, then you can survive without snacks for a little while longer. At least until dawn breaks and the forest changes shape again. The ground begins to shift beneath your feet, not in an earthquake kind of way, but in the slower, more psychological sense. You're starting to notice patterns in the terrain that weren't obvious before. Curves in the forest floor that mimic movement. Long, low scuffs in the underbrush. Faint furrows that trace back from the depression where that belly-up beast might have once dreamed or died. So you follow one. Carefully. Ai? Asahmwali. The trail winds deeper into what was once a coastal jungle. Vines hang like whispers from trees that remember different continents, and then just ahead you see it. A preserved trackway. Real, undeniable. A dozen impressions heavy and close together, sunken deep into rock that used to be mud. Perfectly symmetrical. Rounded, flat-footed, and broad as manhole covers. No dinosaur. It had to be. Ankylosaurs get all the attention, what with their bone-crushing tail clubs and museum stardom, but nodosaurs were quieter. Plainer. Built like armored bulldogs covered in bony plates and shoulder spikes, but lacking the flashy end-of-tail weapons. They didn't need them. They were living tanks either way. You crouch beside this track and lay your hand into the print. It's smooth, surprisingly so, like the creature stepped slowly and with weighty confidence. You trace the arc of where the tail dragged gently behind it, just enough to kiss the mud, not enough to gouge. Balanced. Thoughtful. This thing didn't stumble, it plowed. The forest feels heavier now, as if it remembers being stepped on. You shuffle along the trail, trying to imagine the gait low-slung body feet moving in diagonal pairs, tail swaying in a subtle arc behind. You try walking like its shoulders wide, elbows stiff, head down. It's a workout. The air feels thicker when you imitate an animal that wore its skeleton on the outside. A breeze rustles the ferns and you nearly trip over something just off the path, a half-buried rib. Or at least what looks like a rib. It might be petrified wood, might be wishful thinking, but either way you spend the next 10 minutes digging around it like a raccoon with a lottery ticket. No jackpot, just stone. But it gets you wondering, did nodosaurs find comfort in movement? Were they nomadic, wandering the riverbeds and open forests? Or did they stay near home, hugging the same territory for generations, moving in loops so well-worn they could have sleepwalked it? Odd fact, time sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins, not even joking up to 40 minutes if they want to, which is impressive considering they're barely conscious half the time. A gentle reminder that being slow doesn't mean being simple. And nodosaurs. They were slow, but never simple. Every plate on their back was anchored deep into the dermis. Some had small blood vessels running through them, suggesting they weren't just for defense, they might have played a role in thermoregulation, like a reptilian radiator system. You stop near a broad clearing where the forest light softens and the air turns still. This feels like a place a nodosaur might have rested. A spot between water and cover with visibility in all directions and a bed of soft leaf litter underfoot. You lower yourself to the ground carefully. Now your back's still aching from last night's prehistoric slumber party and stretch out the way one of them might have. Sideways. One leg slightly bent, head low, tail curled to the opposite flank, not quite tucked under like the ankylosaurus, but near enough to guard the underside. It's weirdly comfortable, or at least less absurd. Historians still debate how armored dinosaurs managed deep rest. Some believe they dozed lightly like modern reptiles, brief bursts of sleep constantly alert. Others think they had periods of true unconsciousness, even dreams. There's no direct fossil evidence, of course, no sleepwear preserved in amber, but it's not impossible. And dreams. Well, birds dream. Crocodilians might. It's not so far-fetched to picture a nodosaur twitching gently in its sleep, its claws curling into moss, its tail giving a lazy flick. You lie there for a few minutes watching the light shift through the canopy. Somewhere nearby, a bird-like screech cuts the silence, sharp, urgent, but not meant for you. You're too low, too still, and for once too armored. The nodosaur's secret might have been this: it didn't need to run. It didn't need to hide. All it needed was the patience to outlast whatever dared approach. And patience makes for good sleep. Your body, unfortunately, is less forgiving. The leaf litter is damp, and your hip has found a rock older than politics. You groan, roll to one side, and sit up with a wince that echoes more than you intended. Still, you learned something. The nodosaur didn't need to sleep on its back. It didn't need to show its belly to the moon. It had armor on top, sure. But the ground, that was its defense, and its mattress. The idea of sleep as a kind of surrender doesn't quite fit here. Not for this creature. Sleep for a nodosaur might have been a reclaiming of the forest floor, a reminder that it was born of earth and would return to it without apology or fear. The sun is cresting now. Your breath fogs for the last time before the heat arrives. And just as you rise, you notice one more thing. Another depression. This one deeper, wider, shaped not like sleep, but like a turn. Like the creature twisted here slowly, deliberately before laying down. Or maybe, just maybe, it lay down while turning. So now you try at the turn. You pivot your shoulders while crouching, legs bent and tail imaginary. It's clumsy. You feel like someone playing dinosaur charades after too many cups of prehistoric punch. But there's something in the movement that clicks. A slow, spiraling descent not just into position, but into vulnerability. Which is strange because armored dinosaurs were supposed to be the least vulnerable of all. You lie down again slowly this time, twisting one side of your body to mimic how a stegosaurus might have done it. And it hits you immediately. The posture is awful. Seriously, what chiropractor signs off on this? The plates. Let's talk about the plates. Big vertical slabs of bone anchored along the spine. The most iconic ones belong to Stegosaurus. Of course, those sail-like triangles that turned its back into a walking billboard. But other stegosaurs had them too, in various flavors, rounded, notched, asymmetrical. Some paleontologists argue they were used for defense. Others say display. And a growing minority suspects they helped regulate heat like natural solar panels. But none of that answers the real question. How do you sleep with those things on your back? You try lying flat again. No good. The imaginary plates jab your upper back, forcing your shoulders up and your hips into a weird tilt. If you try rolling to one side, you feel like a tipped-over dishwasher. And don't even ask about sleeping on your back. Your weight shifts wrong. Your imaginary plates dig into the ground like kitchen knives, and you start worrying about tipping over in your sleep. Historians still debate whether stegosaurs had enough flexibility to even reach a full resting posture. The fossil record doesn't show any curled-up skeletons like we get with smaller dinosaurs. Most are found sprawled or collapsed. And that ambiguity leaves you wondering, what if they just didn't sleep like we think they did? Or what if they did it standing? It's not as weird as it sounds. Elephants doze while standing. So do giraffes. Horses can lock their knees to rest upright. And if you had a back like a barbecue rack, maybe you'd think twice before trying to lie down on it. But the idea of a sleep-deprived stegosaurus is weirdly sad. Trudging through Jurassic forests like a caffeinated grad student, eyes half-lidded dreaming with one hemisphere at a time. It adds a new layer to those museum skeletons, less majestic, more just hanging in there. You push yourself up again this time, more mindful of posture. Imagine you're a creature that has to earn its sleep. Every time you lie down, there's a risk you won't be able to stand back up. So maybe sleep becomes ritual. Timed. Strategic. Maybe only near water. Maybe only in herds with rotating sentries. Odd fact, the platypus experiences more REM sleep than almost any other animal. You know that little Australian weirdo with the beak and venomous foot spurs? It sleeps deeply, vividly, and nobody's quite sure why because it's already strange enough awake. The prehistoric world was full of those paradoxes, creatures that looked invincible but moved like porcelain, things armored to the teeth that couldn't scratch their own backs. You imagine a stegosaurus bedding down. It approaches a clearing, sniffs the air with its tiny head on that long, awkward neck. It steps in slow circles, tamping down the vegetation. Then, tail first, it lowers its bulk hips, dipping chest, slumping plates, flexing just enough to let gravity win. Not graceful, not pretty, but functional. And then the real trick getting back up. Modern reptiles use a belly crawl to push off the ground. Mammals have a hip thrust. But stegosaurs, no one knows. Some reconstructions show them leaning to one side, pushing up, with the rear legs first, then rocking forward like a folding chair in reverse. You try it. Bad idea. Your knees pop like bubble wrap and you end up sitting in a patch of ferns with your dignity caught on a root. But the effort helps you understand the challenge. To sleep is to risk. To lie down is to invite the possibility of staying down. And yet, they did. Somehow. Somewhere in a forest like this, a stegosaurus closed its eyes and trusted the earth beneath it not to betray its trust. You find one more detail that makes you pause. A rock polished oddly smooth on one side nestled in the earth like it had once been warmed by something large. You flip it over. Underneath the soil is darker, richer. As if the pressure of a massive belly and tail had compressed the ground into something close to memory. You lie down again, pressing your spine into the same spot, angling your hips just so, stretching your arms like stubby forelimbs and curling your legs into position. And just for a moment, it works, it clicks. You feel a strange symmetry, like you're inside a mold once shaped by armor and bone. Then an ant crawls up your sleeve and you're reminded that comfort is temporary and extinction was probably a mercy. Still, you felt it. For one moment, the possibility that even the most awkward creature found rest, that plates and spikes and prehistoric bad posture weren't enough to keep sleep at bay. Even a dinosaur needed to dream. There's something unsettling about a skeleton with its head thrown back and its tail curled tight. You've seen it a dozen times in museum displays, long dead dinosaurs frozen in what looks like a scream or a spasm. Paleontologists call it the death pose. But it doesn't look like death, it looks like a bad dream. You kneel beside a stone slab marked with one such fossil. Neck arched unnaturally, spine twisted, mouth gaping. It's dramatic, even theatrical, like some ancient actor stuck in their final scene. And for years, people assumed that's what it was, a record of suffering. But here's the twist. Historians still debate whether the death pose was actually caused after death. Not by the act of dying itself, but by what came next. Decomposition, desiccation, and the slow retraction of ligaments as the body dried out. It's called opisthotonus, and it happens in birds too, especially when their nervous system has been stressed. So maybe that arching neck isn't a dinosaur in agony. Maybe it's just physics, biology winding down like a watch with no hands. But the visual still lingers, doesn't it? And it makes you ask, what if this wasn't a death pose? What if this was how some dinosaurs slept? Now you're spiraling. You lie down again this time, trying to mimic the fossil's position. Neck stretched back, legs tucked and tail coiled. It's absurd. If you slept like this, you'd wake up in traction. And yet if you imagine a creature whose tendons naturally pulled tight, whose spine had a resting tension like a coiled spring, it doesn't seem entirely impossible. Birds sometimes sleep with their necks curved back over their wings. Swans do it even with those ridiculous necks. Cats curl their spines into near-perfect circles. Maybe a dinosaur's rest just looked like torment to us. Odd fact, giraffes only need 5 minutes of deep sleep a day. That's not a typo, 5 minutes. They nap standing, their heads drooping like wilting flowers and sometimes fold up like awkward lawn chairs. But they make it work. Because that's what evolution does. It finds the weirdest ways to say good enough. So you look again at the fossil, not as a victim, but as a sleeper. A creature caught mid-recline, its body relaxing in a way that simply doesn't translate well into stone. And here's where it gets messier. Some fossils are found in more relaxed positions. Legs out, tails, flat necks resting gently to the side. And these specimens, they're usually preserved in finer sediments. Calm water, minimal disruption. Almost as if they really were asleep when they died. Not flailing, not panicking, just lying still. You walk along a ridge that once bordered an ancient stream bed. The rock here is thinner, almost like paper, and littered with the impressions of soft-bodied creatures, long-gone fish ferns, even the faint trace of insect wings. And right in the middle of it, a partial imprint of what might be a juvenile armored dinosaur. No bones, just pressure. A memory of mass. The tail isn't curled. It's flat. The body is symmetrical. The shoulders relaxed. And the head tucked under the arm. That's not death. That's nap posture. You crouch beside it, your breath catching slightly. Because if this is what it looks like a dinosaur preserved mid-sleep, then it changes everything. It means they didn't always die in agony. Some just drifted off, the way old dogs do under a tree. Historians still argue about whether dinosaurs had the capacity for soft behaviors, comfort routine, even ritual. But this imprint suggests something incredibly intimate. Not survival, not defense, just stillness. You lie down again, matching the shape. Tail stretched behind you, arms folded beneath your chest neck, bent forward, not back. And it's weirdly okay, not comfy exactly, but doable. It feels like rest with purpose, intentional, like you meant to lie here even knowing you wouldn't get up. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of wet leaves and stone. And for a moment, the prehistoric world folds in around you, not as a place of violence, but as one where even armor wore itself out and settled into peace. You think of modern birds sleeping on branches, muscles locking to prevent a fall. Of crocodiles floating with just their eyes above water. Of turtles buried beneath mud through winter. And you realize rest has always been about compromise. You give up vigilance in exchange for repair. You surrender control for the chance to wake up whole. And armored dinosaurs, maybe they made that same deal. Curling up in the dust, letting their bodies go heavy, trusting their armor to keep watch while they wandered someplace quieter. Back to that fossil. With the arched neck, maybe it was dying, but maybe it wasn't panicked. Maybe it just curled that way. Not because of pain, but because even giants need to fold up sometimes. Even titans need their rest. Let's be honest, if you only watched dinosaur movies, you'd think every single one of these creatures died with its belly to the sky, legs flailing, mouth open like someone just told them their asteroid delivery had arrived early. Especially the armored ones. Ankylosaurs, stegosaurs, nodosaurs. Hollywood loves to show them flipped like upside-down tortoises. But that's the myth. In real life, you'd have a better chance flipping a vending machine. You trudge across a dried riverbed now, following a long, jagged line of crushed sediment. It's broken, uneven, but it tells a story. A heavy body moved here once, dragging something bulky behind it. You think again of those tail clubs, how they might have scraped the ground and how the body above didn't bounce or skip. It pushed through the landscape, hugged it, left an imprint like a glacier's sigh. That's not the posture of something that ends up belly up. And yet, the myth persists, even in some scientific reconstructions, that armored dinosaurs died on their backs like beetles tossed on tile. Why? Well, part of it comes from actual fossil finds. A few skeletons have been found flipped, spine down, ribs to the sky, ankylosaurs especially. But context matters. Historians still debate whether these belly-up fossils reflect actual death poses or just what happened after they died. Because here's what we now think: it's about bloating. Yeah, it's gross, but stay with me. After death, gases build up in the belly. If a dead dinosaur lands in water, say during a flood, it can bloat and roll, especially if the back is heavier due to all that armor. That's not how it died. That's just how it ended up. So no armored dinosaurs weren't flipping themselves over for a snooze. You lie back in the dirt again just to prove the point, and once more it's a disaster. Your back hits hard clumps of earth. Your shoulders dig into imaginary osteoderms, and your legs want to flail like you're late for a meeting and someone's blocking the elevator. Nothing about this says rest. Everything about it says, help, I've made choices. And imagine the risks. A belly-up ankylosaur couldn't even see a predator coming. Its eyes were on the sides of its head, built for wide views near ground level. Rolling over would leave it blind and exposed. You may as well paint a target on your gut and offer free samples. Odd fact, pigs can't look up at the sky. Seriously. Their necks and spines just don't bend that way. You have to tilt a pig backward to get it to see the stars. It's a weird limitation, but not a unique one. Armored dinosaurs might have had similar restrictions, especially in how they rotated their necks and bodies. They were built to see side to side, not to lie there admiring constellations. So why do we keep imagining them belly up? Maybe it's us. Our need to humanize, to see animals in familiar shapes, on their backs, legs curled, like pets, like us. But these weren't pets. They were fortress creatures. Design choices that said, I'm not here for comfort, I'm here to outlast you. And yet, we still want to believe they rested peacefully. That even something covered in spikes and scales had a bedtime. That they could pause, breathe, let go. You climb a small rise and find the edge of what was once a floodplain. Soft mud hardened by time, broken in a checkerboard of fossils and stone. And right there, what looks like the top of a spine. Vertebrae half submerged. Facing down, belly toward the earth. You crouch and trace it with your fingers. It's fragmentary but clear. An armored back, still arched, still layered in thick bone. And no sign of flipping, no bloating distortion. This dinosaur died as it lived, facing the dirt. Heavy, grounded, not a tragic fall, but a final settling. You lie down beside it, chest toward the earth this time. And yeah, your ribs complain. Your nose fills with the scent of wet lichen, and the bugs decide your earlobe is a snack buffet, but you understand now. This posture makes sense, especially for something built like a tank. Historians call this the ventral down position. Simple, really. Belly down, head forward, legs tucked. And for a long time, it was thought to be the exception, but more and more fossil finds are turning that around, suggesting it wasn't rare at all, just misinterpreted. So next time someone shows you an image of a dinosaur flipped like it lost a wrestling match with a trampoline, you'll know better. Even armor needs to rest, but never belly up. And in a way that's kind of comforting, because even when the world turned violent, when floods swept the land and predators prowled the dark, these creatures still found ways to rest with dignity. To bow their heads, brace their tails, and let their bulk become stillness. No surrender, just sleep. You've now followed the trails of giants across dried mudflats, curled yourself into prehistoric sleep poses that your chiropractor would absolutely not approve of, and learned more about bloating than any person reasonably should before breakfast. So what's next? You descend into a hollow shaded by ferns the size of patio umbrellas, where silence pools like water and the ground sinks with memory. You're in the middle of what must have once been a resting ground. Not a battlefield, not a nesting colony, just stillness. One shallow depression after another, some overlapping, some just a tail's length apart. Each one marked by faint impressions in the sediment. A hip here, a shoulder blade there, a curve where a tail once tucked. You walk among them like wandering through the beds of ancient sleepers. You're in an armored graveyard, or maybe an ancient inn. The impressions are large but not chaotic. There's a kind of geometry to their placement, enough space to lie down and stand without tail-whacking your neighbor. You picture a herd of nodosaurs or ankylosaurs gathered here in the cool of evening, settling slowly like cargo ships coming to dock. It's beautiful, in a haunting sort of way. You crouch at one of the larger hollows and let your hand fall to the soil. The top layer crumbles like ash, but underneath compacted smoother, pressed by unimaginable weight. Not just death weight, resting weight. And here's where it gets eerie. Some fossil beds really do look like this. Sites in places like Montana and Alberta have revealed concentrations of armored dinosaur remains close together. Not just scattered bones, but full or nearly full skeletons laid out as if they were caught mid-rest. Some speculate they died together in sudden floods, while others argue they returned to these spots habitually like elephant graveyards, but for sleep, not sorrow. Historians still debate whether such clusters were social by design or simply the result of repeated environmental patterns. Maybe certain clearings were cool at dusk or mossy enough to cushion their weight. Maybe certain scents drew them back year after year, generation after generation. Odd fact, desert tortoises dig shared burrows for the colder months and will actually remember those locations throughout their lives. Some return to the same spot after years apart, like stubborn retirees migrating south for winter. So if tortoises can do it, why not their ancient armored cousins? You lie down again. Don't act surprised and mimic the shape of the largest depression. This one has a side flare, maybe from a shoulder spike or hip jut. You adjust your posture accordingly. Belly down, arms forward, head to the left. The ground under your chest feels different, compact, faintly hollowed, like something exhaled here over and over. And for once it's peaceful. You start to feel what it must have meant to surrender weight. Not as defeat, but as trust. To let armor do its work. To close your eyes, not because the world is safe, but because you are safe in it. There's a joke forming in your head, something about prehistoric memory foam, but you let it slide. The moment's too still. You scan the hollow for signs of violence. A cracked rib, a puncture. Anything to suggest a predator had stalked through here while these giants slept. But no, just clean impressions like snow angels, but heavier, denser, more permanent. What's strange is how deliberate they feel. Like each dinosaur chose its spot. Maybe there was a hierarchy, elders in the middle, juveniles on the edges. Or maybe it was just instinct passed down like the migration of birds. You don't have to understand the ritual to follow it. You sit upright and glance toward the ridgeline. The sun's gone coppery, now leaking through the canopy like filtered memory. It paints long shadows between the hollows, like outlines of things that aren't here anymore. You half expect to see one of them stir a leg twitching in sleep, a tail curling reflexively. But no. Just wind and time. You wander further in. More depressions. A few show signs of overlap, as if a younger dinosaur rested where an elder once had. A form of prehistoric inheritance. My spot now. Thanks, Grandpa. It's humbling. These creatures were armored to survive, but they still had moments like this, pauses in motion, places of quiet. They didn't just stomp and smash and swing their clubs. They slept. Together. And that image is worth holding on to. Not a lone warrior curled beneath a moon, but a family, a herd, lying down side by side. Spines to the sky, tails curled like commas in a sentence too ancient to read. You pick up a chunk of hardened sediment and turn it over in your hand. It's flecked with what might be mineralized plant matter, ferns maybe, bedding, makeshift pillows, or just things flattened under dinosaurs who didn't care what was growing beneath them. Either way, it's part of the story now. And the story is clear, even tanks lie down. Not just in death, but in life. Even fortresses need rest. You step back and take one last look over the graveyard. It doesn't feel like a place of loss anymore. It feels like a snapshot of peace. Rain, the kind that doesn't ask permission. One moment the air is thick with jungle silence. The next water is pounding the canopy like 1,000 small fists. You duck beneath a fallen log, huge, ancient, carved by insect jaws, and the slow decay of centuries, and listen as the forest transforms. And here's the thing. Armored dinosaurs didn't just survive these downpours. They used them. You peer out at the clearing from your makeshift shelter trying to imagine the scene millions of years ago. A herd of ankylosaurs caught in the storm. The big adults hunker low, tails curled, feet planted wide in the muck. Their backs, those iconic armored shells, shed the water like tile roofs. They weren't just armor, they were umbrellas. You spot an eroded slope nearby, flattened in places where the runoff has cleared moss from the stone. At the bottom, what looks like a trough-shaped depression. Maybe it was a shallow basin, maybe a stream, or maybe an ancient storm shelter. You scramble down toward it, boots slipping a little. When you reach it, the first thing you notice is the packed sediment inside, not natural. It's been compressed by weight, big weight, repeatedly. You lie down. Of course you do. This time it's different. The sides are raised just slightly like a mold. You press your arms along your sides, curl your knees in, and imagine your tail. Not that you have one, but imagination's been doing all the heavy lifting anyway, curled around to block the exposed part of your flank. It's snug. Now, picture this lightning cracks overhead. A low rumble that makes trees shake, and in the middle of it, an ankylosaur folds itself into one of these basins. It doesn't panic. It doesn't flee. It settles, using the hollow to disappear. Just a low shape with a high backwater pooling off its side's tail, tucked like a weighted blanket. Historians still debate whether this behavior was learned or instinctual. Did these dinosaurs pass down storm shelter knowledge through herds? Or was it hardwired, a deep inherited response to barometric pressure and distant thunder? Odd fact, elephants can detect rainstorms from over 150 miles away. Something about low-frequency vibrations. They'll sometimes start moving before the clouds even roll in. So if elephants can predict a storm, why not dinosaurs? You watch the water streak down the ridgeline and imagine a herd doing the same, moving slowly, deliberately toward these hollows. Not running, just repositioning. Not because they feared the rain, but because they understood it. And the tails, yes, the tails. Ankylosaurs had those massive clubs at the end, sure, but the rest of the tail was no joke either. Thick, flexible, near the base, armored to the tip. In a storm, it could anchor the body in the mud curve around soft underbelly tissue, act as a barrier against cold. Almost like a storm cocoon. You roll onto your side and run a hand along the damp stone beside you. The grooves are faint but telling. Not claw marks, not erosion, something in between. Possibly from repeated tail drags. A creature settling in the same position over and over. A storm ritual. Not everything about prehistoric life was constant terror and high-speed chases. There were rhythms, predictable patterns, race stops, thunder bunkers. You step out of the hollow and walk further downhill toward where runoff collects into a slow-moving stream. Here the ground is softer and the ferns are pressed flat in unnatural angles. You can see where something big might have walked through recent in geological terms. Maybe a fossil digger's backhoe. Or maybe something older. Hard to tell. But then you spot something better. An old mud cast. A preserved indentation of what had to be a tail thick at the root tapering to one side. Beside it, a partial imprint of a leg. But the spacing is wrong for walking. It looks more like bracing. A dinosaur crouched here, possibly crouched during the storm. You crouch too. Recreate the posture. Front half lower than the back tail, out wide feet spread for grip. Now imagine trying to sleep in that. It's a weird pose, more like someone preparing for an earthquake than a nap, but maybe that was the point. In these moments, it wasn't about comfort. It was about surviving what came next. Because storms back then weren't like the ones you dodge on your commute. These were primordial tempests. Supercells born from volcanic air and oceans that hadn't yet figured out their boundaries. A lightning bolt could have cooked a hadrosaur where it stood. So yeah, if you had armor, you used it, but you also hid when you could. And some of that hiding looked a lot like sleep. You head back toward the log shelter as the rain finally begins to taper. Steam rises off the ground in waves, and the trees sparkle like the world's been lacquered. The hollows are full of water now, but for a moment they held bodies. Curled, still, waiting. Not just armored dinosaurs surviving the storm, but learning from it. And maybe in those soaked and thunder-shaken moments they found their deepest sleep of all. You're halfway across the basin when your foot lands on something strange, less of a step and more of a slide. You pause, peel back the wet moss, and there it is. A smear. Not a footprint, not a claw mark, something broader, flatter. A long drag. As if something large had been here and hadn't quite lifted itself. And that's when the idea hits you. Not from above, not from the sky or the stars, but from below, from the ground. Because what if armored dinosaurs didn't just lie down? What if they rolled? It sounds ridiculous. These were literal walking tanks, creatures with armor-plated backs and legs that looked like tree stumps. The idea of one rolling over willingly seems as likely as a cathedral somersaulting. And yet here it is, the trackway of something massive that didn't just walk, but shifted. The trail runs shallow at first, then deepens into a groove. It doesn't zigzag like a gate. It arcs. A long, curving sweep, as if the entire body twisted sideways and left its story behind. You trace it like a crime scene investigator with no witnesses and a million years too late. The arc starts with broad belly impressions, narrows into what looks like a shoulder press, then widens again with a tail sweep. Not fast, not desperate, more like a ritual movement. Or a dance. Yes, a prehistoric roll. Historians still debate whether armored dinosaurs could flip themselves on purpose. Most reconstructions show their legs splayed just wide enough to allow a side flop, but not enough for a full roll. Then again, anatomy doesn't always follow logic. Crocodiles, which look stiff and armored, can perform barrel rolls when attacking prey. Sea turtles roll in the surf. Even pangolins, living bundles of plated defense, can curl into complete spheres. Odd fact, hedgehogs often roll in grass or mud to coat their spines with new scents. It's called anointing. No one knows exactly why, but it's suspected to be a mix of camouflage and chemical communication. So maybe, just maybe, these massive armored dinosaurs had a purpose for their rolls too. You drop to your knees and try to mimic the movement, not that your joints agree. First you crouch, then shift weight to one side. Your shoulder drops, hip follows. You roll halfway. And you understand instantly that doing this with 2 tons of body and a tail like a mace would require a kind of commitment you're not ready for. But the movement is possible. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about sleep at all. You glance back at the arc. Imagine a dinosaur flopping onto its side, not to rest but to scratch an itch, or to cool the armored plates on its back by exposing them to shade or breeze, or even brace yourself to attract a mate. After all, peacocks display feathers, moose bellow, birds of paradise do those weird shimmy dances. Why wouldn't an armored dinosaur roll dramatically in a clearing tail, swinging flanks, thudding into the earth, showing off its battle-hardened body like a prehistoric TikTok challenge? Another interpretation lingers too, one a little more somber. What if it was about vulnerability? a final movement before death, a twist onto the side to protect a wound or to shift weight from failing limbs. Some fossils show large adults with evidence of hip or leg injuries. Rolling might have been a way to ease pressure, or a failed attempt to rise. You step further along the arc and find it a partial footprint beside the smear. Just one, deep, crisp, meaning the creature tried to stand here. Maybe succeeded, maybe not. You crouch again, and this time you let your body twist into the full roll. Onto your side, then back. Imaginary tail heavy, legs curled like anchors. And there is a surprising sensation. Stability. The armor on your back presses evenly into the earth. Your sides feel protected. Nothing can sneak up from behind. And your underbelly curled tight, not exposed. Just tucked in like a coiled spring. You begin to understand why these creatures might have risked the roll. Not just for sleep, not just for courtship, but to reset, to shift weight, to change perspective. You lie still like that for a while, letting the clouds pass overhead, watching shadows drift across the clearing. And for the first time, you imagine the world upside down, not in chaos, but in rhythm. Like even the largest, heaviest animals needed to move in ways that didn't always make sense to us. And the best part? No one agrees. Historians still argue about what these drag marks mean. Some say accidental collapse. Others suggest play. One controversial theory proposes that young armored dinosaurs rolled as a defense tactic, confusing predators with unpredictable movement, like a reptilian judo roll. No one's proved it, but the marks remain. So you get up, brush off the dirt, and follow the track a little further. It vanishes into a dry bank eroded by time. But in your head, the image stays clear, a massive creature twisting its body not to die, not to collapse, but to explore a different shape. Not just armored, not just heavy, but curious. And that somehow makes them more alive. Sleep doesn't come easy when you're built like a coffee table wearing medieval armor. You've learned that much by now. Every attempt to lie down has been a contest between curiosity and chiropractic regret. But tonight, under a hazy sky and the rustle of leaves overhead, you decide to try again. You nestle into a shallow depression at the base of a fern cluster, fold your arms beneath you, and start to wonder something strange. Did armor ever make these creatures insomniacs? It seems logical, doesn't it? A body so protected that it became its own obstacle. Ankylosaurs, for example, were basically land ships, spine reinforced with fused vertebrae, ribs locked tight, skull encased in bone thicker than the walls of your last apartment. Great for surviving a fight, but terrible for napping. You shift slightly, testing different poses. On your belly, your imaginary osteoderms jab into your ribs. On your side, your hip armor wants to lever you over like a folding chair. On your back, don't even go there again. You wonder what's the biological cost of being a tank. Historians still debate how long it took for ankylosaurs to evolve their full suite of armor. Some think the early species only had basic plating. Lightweight, flexible. Others argue the heavy armor came quickly, perhaps as a desperate adaptation to rising predator threats. But either way, by the late Cretaceous, these creatures were walking battlements. And that makes sleep complicated. Odd fact, dolphins sleep with one hemisphere of their brain at a time. The other half stays alert, managing breathing and scanning for threats. They've essentially outsourced insomnia to biology. Genius, if you ask me. Could armored dinosaurs have done something similar? No fossil can prove it, of course. Brains don't fossilize well, and the structure of sleep doesn't leave bone evidence. But birds, the modern descendants of dinosaurs, exhibit unihemispheric slow-wave sleep like dolphins. Crocodilians, too, show patterns of intermittent alertness during rest. So the mechanism could have existed. You lie flat again and imagine it, one side of your brain drifting into sleep while the other listens for movement. One eye closed, the other scanning the underbrush. It's not restful, but it's enough, and sometimes enough is all you get. You remember that trackway you followed earlier, the one with the strange smear? What if that dinosaur wasn't moving through the forest at all? What if it was pacing, like a restless sleeper, like someone who couldn't quite shut off? The idea settles in your chest like cold stone. What if armor didn't just protect, but isolated? What if these creatures couldn't relax because they never had to fight, because they were built not to run, but to endure? You look up at the canopy and see nothing but flickering light and spider silhouettes. It's beautiful. It's also deeply inconvenient for sleeping. Maybe that's why some armored dinosaurs chose hollows. Not just for protection from predators or storms, but for peace, for contour, for stillness. Somewhere soft enough to ease the weight of living in your own shield. You pull a blanket of leaves over yourself, primitive, damp, slightly gross, and breathe deeply. Not because you're trying to sleep, but because you want to understand what it felt like to rest in a world where everything tried to eat you, flip you, or trample your eggs. And still you slept. Maybe not for long, maybe not deeply, but somewhere in the night beneath the ferns and the thunder and the creeping insects, you exhaled. Let the muscles loosen. Let the weight of your own back relax into soil that had for once stopped moving. It must have been enough. It had to be. You don't survive millions of years without getting at least some sleep. Your body shifts again, not because it wants to, but because the armor in your imagination has grown heavier. It's not uncomfortable anymore. It's just there, like memory, like instinct, like something you carry even when you're still. And maybe that's the lesson here. Armor doesn't just protect, it defines. It reshapes your rest. It turns sleep into strategy. Not a surrender, but a calculation. You close your eyes not all the way, just enough, and listen like an ankylosaur might have. Half asleep, half waiting, letting the world breathe around you while your body finally goes still. The night has thinned out now. The insects have softened their chorus, and even the ferns seem to be exhaling. You rise slowly, brushing leaf mold off your arms, and begin wandering again this time, with a question still lingering like fog behind your eyes. Where did they dream? Not how. That's been your focus for a while now, belly up. Belly down, curled tails, and awkward shoulder armor. But now you want to know where the armored dreamers actually chose to sleep. Not just collapsed, not just rolled, but deliberately rested. You follow a narrow path bordered by knee-high horsetails and flowering cycades, stepping softly over roots that haven't pulsed with life in 70 million years. And then you find it. A soft bed. No, really, it's a sandstone shelf layered in fine ripple marks, low and shallow, like the pressed imprint of a giant body. Around it, ferns grow thicker than usual, and the sediment holds moisture even in dry air. You crouch, press your palm into the soil, and feel the grain shift slightly. This was a nest, not for eggs, for rest. The idea seems ridiculous until you look closer. Fossil sites across the world have uncovered shallow, dish-like depressions with faint ridges, what paleontologists call resting traces. Some are so clean you can see the imprint of a shoulder. Others show rib pressure. A few even preserve skin impressions. And when they're found far from nesting grounds or water holes, the interpretation becomes clearer. These were beds. Armored dinosaurs may have dug them with their feet or settled into them over time. Sand would have softened under their weight. The result? A natural mattress. Primitive memory foam. Odd fact: wombats dig cubic poop. Yes, cubes. No one's entirely sure why, but one theory suggests it helps keep the pellets from rolling away, perfect for marking territory. Another theory: efficient stacking. The point is, animals do strange things for comfort. So you lie down again, this time in the center of the depression. It's actually kind of nice. Your back presses against a cool curve of earth. Your shoulders fit into subtle grooves. For a second, it feels like the world was built for this exact shape. You close your eyes and imagine the night settling around you, the stars pulsing above a world still figuring out how to be a planet. You picture a herd nearby, quiet. Not grazing, not moving, just still. Historians still debate whether these sand nests were communal. Some theorize they were reused, passed down from generation to generation like sleeping spots in a deer herd. Others think they were temporary, scraped in the dirt when the day's journey had been long, the heat had been unbearable, or when the air smelled of storms. There's even a theory that armored dinosaurs created these shallow nests not just to sleep, but to regulate temperature. In cooler climates, the depressions could trap warm air. In hotter regions, they'd retain shade moisture. Thermodynamic dinosaur beds. Now that's luxury. You open your eyes and imagine it again. A nodosaur stepping slowly into this very depression tail, dragging just slightly, body easing down with the care of something that knew how heavy it was. The plates on its back shifting into position like roof tiles, its limbs folding neatly, tail curling along the outer edge of the bed like punctuation. It's not hard to see. You sit up gently and realize your hand has been resting in a slight impression beside the main hollow. A second bed, smaller, shallower, maybe juvenile. Or maybe just for the tail, you're not sure which idea is more endearing. This wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a place to dream. Not in the human sense, no caveman paintings, no lullabies, but in the way wild animals sometimes twitch in their rest eyes, darting limbs flinching. Their bodies replaying memories or instincts. Birds do it. Dogs do it. Even octopuses show color shifts while sleeping patterns that mimic the camouflage used during hunting. Some scientists believe this is a sign of REM sleep. If that's true, then armored dinosaurs may have dreamed in flashes of scent and sound. The hiss of a predator's breath, the rustle of a rival's tail, the weight of the earth as it held them in place. You wonder, did they remember their beds? Did they return to the same ones like homing pigeons to a rooftop? You rise slowly. The sandstone crackles softly beneath your feet. You mark the spot with a few pebbles, completely symbolic, completely unnecessary. But you want to remember it too. Because in a world where everything was fight or flight, where every shadow might hold teeth, these creatures made time for stillness, not by chance, by choice. And you're starting to understand that sleep, even for a dinosaur, was never just a break. It was a decision. A message to the world that said, I am here, I am safe, I am still alive. You're starting to feel a little too comfortable in prehistoric depressions. Dirt in your ears, fern dust in your hair, a crick in your neck that's probably older than the Triassic. But still, you keep going. Because just as your body begins to ache, your brain starts to spark. What if sleep wasn't always a choice? You climb the lip of a sunken ravine, one that seems out of place, jagged, uneven, like something once crashed through it. And there at the bottom you see them two deep U-shaped impressions in the soil, spaced just far enough apart behind limbs. Between them a drag mark. Behind that another and another. You're looking at a struggle. Something fell here. Or was thrown here, and for the first time since this journey began, the silence doesn't feel peaceful, it feels punctuated. This isn't a sleeping pose. This is a crime scene. The pattern is uneven. The impressions are too deep in some places, too scattered in others. You can picture it, an armored dinosaur scrambling, clawing at the slope, dragging its tail like a counterweight. Not from fatigue, from fear. You move closer, look for bite marks. There on the edge of a stone ridge, a series of gouges, not sharp enough to be claws, blunt, rounded, crushing teeth. Tyrannosaur. Historians still debate whether tyrannosaurs regularly hunted armored dinosaurs or if they only targeted the young, old, or sick. Ankylosaurs were the tanks of their time, low to the ground, with bone-crushing tails and backs no predator wanted to mess with. But sometimes the odds shifted. Sometimes hunger made things experimental. Odd fact, lions sometimes flip over buffalo calves by biting the legs and tugging sideways until the animal rolls. It's rare, risky, but if the prey is slow enough, the strategy can work. You crouch beside the impressions and imagine it again. An ankylosaur, massive, exhausted, possibly wounded, rolling not to sleep but because it was forced to. knocked off balance, tipped. The underbelly, usually pressed into the earth, now exposed. The weak point, the nightmare. And maybe, just maybe, it survived. You walk further down the ravine and find another impression. Smaller, softer, not as deep. This one doesn't look like a crash, it looks like a pause. As if the animal regained its footing, staggered, and lay down willfully. Exhausted but alive. This wasn't sleep as ritual. This was sleep as recovery. You lie down, don't pretend you weren't going to, and feel the difference immediately. The angle is steeper, one shoulder higher than the other. The tail curve presses into a groove on the upslope. It's a defensive position, belly still protected, vision half obscured, but the posture says still here. Not surrender, just catching breath. And that's the quiet horror of it. Sometimes the only sleep you get is the kind after survival. You rest like that for a long moment, imagining the battered creature exhaling slowly, muscles trembling, breath shallow but steady, the predator gone. The tail still twitching, not out of fear, out of memory. The fight replaying even as the world goes dim. What does it mean to be a creature built for defense but still at risk of being undone? You sit up and look across the ravine. It's silent now. The impressions are drying. The breeze moves only the lightest of leaves. But somewhere in this memory there was struggle. There was panic. And after all that, there was rest. Historians like to argue about whether ankylosaurs ever flipped back over if toppled. Some say they were doomed the moment they tipped. Others suggest they could right themselves with the help of their tails, levering against the ground like a slow-motion push-up. You hope it's the second one, because no one wants to believe that a single mistake was always fatal. You climb out of the ravine and scan the horizon. Hills like knuckles, trees like ancient eyelashes, and in the middle of it all, the unmistakable hush of a world between heartbeats. You find one more impression before you stop for the night. This one's nearly erased, eroded, sunken, almost invisible, but you recognize the shape. Flat, balanced, tail groove, shoulder press, sleep, not terror, not collapse, just sleep. Because sometimes, even after being hunted, battered, flipped, and bruised, sometimes you still get to lie down. And that's the moment that matters. You've been chasing dreams across fossil beds and sleeping positions like a prehistoric sleepwalker. And just when you think you've seen every possible resting shape a dinosaur could contort into, you find the strangest one yet. This one's not in a ravine or nestled in a ferny cradle. It's inside a rock slab split neatly by a dig team years ago and forgotten on the edge of a dry creek bed. The cast is shallow but startlingly clear, ribs, flared wide belly, pressed into the mud, and between those ribs, the soft suggestion of breath. You freeze. Not in fear, more like reverence. Because this isn't a trackway. It's not a death pose. It's something caught mid-inhale. You run your fingers along the rib arc and feel the expansion, the pressure of lungs once filled. Not collapsing, expanding. Like this animal was breathing, really breathing when it fossilized. And then the weirder part hits you. Maybe it was asleep. There's precedence. One fossil found in Mongolia appears to have preserved a small theropod curled in classic bird-like rest head, tucked under the arm-tail, wrapped like a cat. Paleontologists suspect it died suddenly, maybe in a sandstorm, maybe under ash. But the position wasn't panicked. It was peaceful. Could this be another one? You kneel beside the rock, letting the stillness wrap around you like fog. If this creature, armored, slow-weighted, was actually sleeping, when it died, it means it was caught in a rare moment. The kind of moment nature almost never lets us see, the breath between thoughts. Historians still debate whether this fossil represents sleep or suffocation. Some argue that the rib expansion could have been a final gasp, a reflex. Others believe it's too symmetrical, too perfect to be anything but a calm breath. Either way, the fossil records something rare: life suspended. Odd fact, parrots experience muscle atonia during REM sleep just like humans. That means they go limp while dreaming. Their claws lock onto branches, but the rest of them just dangles. like little feathered rag dolls. And if that can happen to birds descendants of dinosaurs, who's to say ankylosaurs didn't experience similar states? You lie beside the rock slab mimicking the pose. Chest out, shoulders wide, imaginary plates flexing slightly. And then you breathe. Not like a sigh, but a push, deep, slow, deliberate. You match it to the fossil's shape, and in that one inhale you understand what it must have felt like to be still, not just armored against the world, but within it. This wasn't a collapse. This was a pause, and it's so different from everything else you've seen. No roll, no struggle, no scramble to bury the belly. Just quiet. Like the creature wasn't hiding from predators or bracing against storms. It was just sleeping, as if nothing was wrong. And maybe there wasn't. Maybe this one, whoever it was, wherever it came from, had found the perfect moment. The air was still. The ground was warm. The herd was near. And it drifted off with a full breath. That's what this fossil says to you. Not I died, but I stopped running. You roll onto your back just briefly and stare up at the trees above, imagining stars beyond them. You're breaking your own rule here. But for this moment, it feels right. You wonder how many other fossils began as this, not drama, not chase, but sleep. How many more lie undiscovered, buried in mud, frozen in mid-breath? How many dreams were fossilized before we ever knew what a dinosaur was? And here's the thing, we don't dream in bones. But sometimes bones remember the shape of a dream. The curl of a tail, the slow rhythm of breath, the silent stillness of a creature that trusted the earth to hold it. You rise gently, brushing dust from your palms. The slab will stay here. It's not your place to move it, but you'll remember. Because tonight, in the most unexpected of places, you found the only known fossil snorer. And for once, extinction didn't seem so loud. There's a hush that falls over the prehistoric earth in the hours just before dawn, the kind of hush that feels heavier than silence. You move slowly now, half from exhaustion, half from a strange reverence, as if the ground itself might stir if you walk too loudly. You climb a slope carved from clay and shale, your boot slipping once or twice as you reach the top. And there, sprawled before you, is something you didn't expect to see again. A simulation rig. Weather-worn, half-sunk and blinking faintly, one of those old augmented research modules left behind from the fieldwork era. Probably mothballed years ago, forgotten under budget cuts and layers of sediment. But someone had been studying here. Someone wanted to recreate what you're only just starting to understand. You tap the screen. It flickers, then comes alive in pale green wireframes, 3D models of ankylosaurs in slow motion. Not walking, not fighting, falling. The simulation is looping. You watch it 3 times before you realize what's wrong. They're not dying in these animations, they're descending. With each playback, the creature's center of gravity dips backward, tail sweeping, wide legs tucking as the shoulders lower, hips shifting, weight distributing. It's like watching a couch settle onto its cushions. And it's shockingly graceful. Not what you'd expect from a 2-ton creature covered in bone. No clumsy stumble, no awkward thud, just deliberate slow-motion collapse. Like the earth was always meant to receive it. You cycle through the data pressure maps tail, kinematics, shoulder rotation. Historians still debate whether fully grown ankylosaurs could intentionally lie down without mechanical help, without digging, leaning, or falling sideways like furniture in an earthquake. But this simulation suggests they could. If the angle was right, if the slope was gentle, if they'd learned the trick over time. Odd fact, walruses can fall asleep while floating vertically in the water. They drift like soft pillars, tusks bobbing gently, their immense bulk supported by nothing but salt and trust. It's both ridiculous and soothing, like most truths. Back to the simulation. You run a variation this time, a fall. Sudden sharp tail flailing. The result? Catastrophic. The tail crashes down, late balance lost, the whole animal topples backward and lands hard, armor first. Not restful. Final. You watch it again and again. The difference is timing. Control. One movement is chosen, the other forced. And here's the uncomfortable realization: maybe most fossilized ankylosaurs didn't fall at all. Maybe they lay down. By choice? With effort. With the same determination they carried through every thunderstorm, every predator chase, every million-year march across shifting continents. You run the last scenario: a dying ankylosaur. Slow heartbeat, shallow breath. It walks to the edge of a stream bed, curls its tail like a question mark, and lets its body lower inch by inch into the earth. The plates clink softly as they settle. The head bows, the back breathes one last time. No drama, no roar, just stillness. You turn off the screen. Leave the rig behind. It's not yours to fix, and you've already seen what you came here to see. Down the slope in a wash of moonlight, the ground levels out into a clearing of bone-colored shale. You can just make out the outline of another fossil bed, not full skeletons, just fragments, but enough. You kneel beside a half-buried osteoderm, an armored plate from the flank of some long-lost wanderer, and imagine what the last fall must have felt like, not as failure, but as peace. Because maybe that's the truth we've missed. Armored dinosaurs didn't die fighting. They didn't die belly up, tail swinging in one last act of resistance. Maybe they simply stopped. Walked until the legs gave out, curled the tail, lowered the shoulders, and let go. Not a battle, not a fall, a choice. And in that final gesture, maybe they told us everything we need to know about endurance. Not just that they survived for millions of years, but that they knew when to stop. The sky has started to blush, that pre-dawn moment where everything looks dreamlike and unreal. Shadows stretch too long, colors bloom too early, and even your own breath feels borrowed. You're at the end now, not of time exactly, just the end of what the land wants to show you. You find the last fossil by accident, not underfoot, not in a ravine, but embedded in the side of a sandstone bluff high above the trail like a mural carved by silence. It's a nodosaur, complete, preserved in exquisite detail, every plate, every scale, every wrinkle of skin hardened into stone. The tail is curled to the side, the legs folded beneath the body, the head resting flat against the earth. There's no twist, no arch, no panic. This animal didn't die in agony. It laid down. The specimen is famous, actually. You've heard about it before, the mummified nodosaur from Canada, so well preserved that you can still see the armor's texture. It was found belly down, back intact, facing forward, like it had just paused for a nap and let millions of years carry the rest. Historians call it a miracle of fossilization. But you're not Simdon. You're not thinking about geology. You're thinking about the moment before the stone. Because this is the question that brought you here in the first place. Did armored dinosaurs ever sleep on their backs? And the answer is finally clear. No, not by habit, not by instinct. Not unless they were tipped, rolled, or betrayed by bloated gas and the indifference of ancient water. They didn't flip themselves like pets on carpets. They didn't bask belly up under the stars. They didn't trust the world with their soft underbellies. They slept the way they lived, grounded, anchored, shielded. You crouch near the fossil and mimic the pose one last time, knees tucked, arms tight. Spine bowed slightly forward. It's not elegant, it's not even particularly restful, but it feels real. Odd fact: pangolins. Those scaly, armored mammals of the modern world sleep curled into perfect coils. Tails wrapped over their faces, claws tucked beneath their bellies. They don't expose anything if they can help it. They trust only what they touch. You imagine the nodosaur's last moment, not dramatic, not desperate, just the slow exhale of something ancient lying down in a quiet place, its weight pressing into earth that would one day become stone. Historians still debate whether this particular specimen died while sleeping or while seeking shelter from rising water. The details are blurry, but the posture doesn't lie. This was not a collapse. This was a gesture. And there's something deeply human in that, isn't there? The desire to rest without risk, to curl into a shape that says, I'm finished for now. Not forever, just for a little while. You sit there longer than you mean to. Let the wind pass over your skin. Let the light shift across the fossil's plated back. And you realize something else. Armor doesn't mean invincibility. It means intention. It means you carry your shelter with you, but you still need a place to put it down. And this place, this bluff, this fossil, this moment, it was enough. The nodosaur is still armored. Still curled, still waiting. Not in pain, not in fear. Just resting. Just remembered.